tend to have this catalog, this mental catalog of beliefs and attitudes, and sometimes even patterned behaviors and responses to things and thinking. So the first one Melissa and I talked about, right, was black and white thinking. Because this one comes up a lot in me too, if we're being honest. So the best way to explain this, I'm going to use a word, and I can type it in if you want me to. Black and white thinking is this like really fast decision making. So I'm going to use the word heuristics or rules of thumb.
I got it.
Okay. It's a fancy word that basically means rules of thumb. And honestly, I have some rules of thumb for making quick decisions about things, and sometimes it's very useful. You know, I wrote an email recently that people thought was hilarious because I have this rule of thumb about potluck dinners and gatherings with people. I don't eat at potlucks. It grosses me out. That's how people get sick. And I got to tell you, I've avoided a lot of stomach bugs with this rule of thumb. So it's a very useful heuristic for me. I use it to make decisions about parties, you know, what I'm going to do at a party. So most of the time, this is okay. And it does help us. But sometimes when we are making quick decisions, we are using only the information that is readily available right in front of us, easy to read. And we might see, Heather agrees with me, and we might be missing some details, some subtlety, some nuance, right? You know, that never happens with ADHD, right? And with a lot of my clients, this black and white thinking, it shows up in our conversations when we talk about how we evaluate ourselves and our performance in whatever context, at work, in relationships, you know, whatever. And we don't see our own performance as a continuum. We're either winning or losing, or we're success, or we're a failure. Or we're a success, or we're a failure. We're a hell yes or a hell no. We don't.
But that's, I mean, there's a lot of, you know, chocolate or vanilla, I've heard it described that way. You only get on or off. There's no in the middleness with it, right?
Yeah. And, you know, I've actually had people say funny things to me in conversation. Like, my therapy, it's just not working anymore. They tell me, okay, but, you know, tell me what you mean by that. Because a lot of the time, again, we don't see progress. Like someone who's been seeing a therapist, say for a year or more, may not be able to measure, especially with ADHD, where we started, where we are now in the journey, and where we're going. So the black and white thinking shows up a lot.
But there's this sort of short-term memory issues, and there's really like, what can we remember the last 2 or 3 days? Like we could have had something great happen the end of last week, but something happened yesterday, and then can we even remember anything good? So that where are you now where you're not necessarily seeing progress? Progress is over time, right? You know, those pictures where they'll have somebody who's pregnant taking their picture sideways every day, right? You know, the first 3 months, is there any change? But there's changes happening, whether we can see the small progress or not. And with the not having a good memory, the small progress is really lost.
Yeah. I've also had people tell me, this is very black and white. People tell me who have never tried medications before. I have had people say, this medication isn't working. And I'll say, how long have you been taking it? You know, how can you tell? And they usually say, because I'm the same, like everything's the same. I still sometimes forget to do X, Y, and Z, or I still, you know, don't meet all of my deadlines. And I'll say, well, what are you doing right? What is working? And sometimes we don't see the gray. We don't see the gray. It's very hard for not all of us. Again, I don't want to say all of us, but some of us have a hard time finding the gray. I do.
Yeah.
I admit it pretty readily.
Well, I like the last breakthrough I had. I could be referring to that for, you know, a month, 6 weeks, right? Did anything else happen over there? But maybe that story starts to get a little glued in your mind, and it's hard for us to notice that we're moving. But I feel like that's kind of the moving car in general, right? You'll be in the car, especially when there's nobody around and you're going 80 and it feels like you're still only going 40. It's like if you didn't look at the speedometer, you wouldn't know. But where is our speedometer? Where is our way of noticing motion, noticing progress? And, tracking tools, not always something we're great at, right?
And I think I've heard from, psychologists and things that we do tend to have a negativity bias. All humans do, but we can remember the stuff that we failed at pretty easily. And it's harder to recall some of the successes. And it's harder to even, is that a success? Like, how do I measure success? Yeah, it's harder for some of us to do that. So the first thing I came up with, and people laugh at me when I say this, but the first thing I came up with was talking to yourself out loud. When you work with a therapist or a coach, a lot of times you will notice they reflect your words back at you. They might paraphrase, but they reflect the words back at you. And it's so you can hear the words. Because often we say things and we think things that when you really hear it, sound a little absurd. And people laugh at me, but I've been saying this for years, that it's also good for if you have executive function challenges, it's really good to externalize the steps that you're doing right now. This is what I have to do. This is, obviously you can't, talk to yourself in certain environments without people looking at you funny. But I always tell people to externalize it, or find somebody that you can externalize the thinking to and who will reflect it back to you.
This thing that you're talking out loud, I do that from time to time. And often, I mentioned my cheat sheet that I have. If you're using it, sometimes you do have to make a note that you've moved on from a certain step, right? And saying the things out loud. I find that with friends of mine who are verbal processors, they don't really need me. They're blabbing and I'm in the room, but it's not about communicating. So if this is about self-communicating, maybe saying it out loud. I mean, I do say things out loud to myself, so it seems very useful to me. Also, just as this thing makes sense once you start to say it out loud. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm the one that will walk into my laundry room and be like, why did you come in here? Like, come on, Liz, there was a reason why you came in here. Oh, I know what you were doing. Yes. It's crazy. I do talk to myself. I mean, I do. And it actually has been very helpful. I've done it at work too. Alone in the copy room back in the day, I would plan out my lesson, mentally rehearse my lesson, sort of mumbling to myself. So there is a little bit of research out there. And there was also an article about this in the New York Times this week. There's a little bit of research about sort of third party, like giving yourself a little distance. It would be like an example would be me saying something funny like, Liz opened the refrigerator, walked around the corner, came back around and ran smack into the refrigerator door. And there is this sort of psychological distancing thing that is very helpful to some people. Yes, it sounds a little wonky when you're doing it, but there is some research on this. So talk to yourself. Just do it.